There's a kind of cruelty so ordinary, it doesn't even bother to announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't strike. It arrives in small packages, a sneer held a half-second too long, a nickname spoken just within earshot, a laugh that stops the moment a person walks into a room. The kind of cruelty that says, "We have decided what you are, and what you are is beneath us." The kind that is passed around a break room like something sweet, shared between people who need to agree on somebody's smallness in order to feel their own size. Delia Santos had been receiving that kind of cruelty for 4 years, and she had not once given it back. That was the thing about Delia. That was the thing that the people who mocked her never quite understood, even when it was sitting right in front of them. Her patience was not weakness. Her silence was not ignorance. The way she kept her head down and her hands moving was not the behavior of a woman who didn't notice what was being done to her. It was the behavior of a woman who had decided, very deliberately, that she was not going to let it cost her anything she couldn't afford to lose. And Delia Santos could not afford to lose very much. If this story is already finding its way into your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to Mama Told Me. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. Mama always said, kindness travels farther than you think. She was 34 years old. She worked the early shift, 5:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, in the civilian cafeteria of the Whitmore Federal Complex, a sprawling government installation on the edge of the city where military offices, administrative departments, and a half-dozen other agencies shared one campus, one parking structure, and one cafeteria the size of a school gymnasium. She had been there since she was 30. She had started as a general kitchen aide and, after 2 years, been moved to the serving line, which was considered a kind of promotion in that world, though nobody had told her that or given her a raise to confirm it. Her uniform was the same dusty gray as everyone else's. Name tag, non-slip shoes, hairnet that left a faint red line across her forehead every day at 2 o'clock. She woke each morning at 4:15 without an alarm because she had learned not to trust sleep past that hour, not with a 7-year-old who needed to be fed and dressed and walked to the neighbor's apartment before Delia caught the 4:52 bus. The bus cost $2.40 each way. She counted this. Her daughter's name was Lucia. She was 7 and missing one front tooth and had recently declared, with the total authority only a 7-year-old can project, that she intended to be a veterinarian when she grew up, specifically specializing in rabbits. Delia had said yes, absolutely, of course, and had thought about tuition and thought about the overtime shift she still needed to pick up and had smiled at her daughter with everything she had. Lucia was the arithmetic behind every decision Delia made. The rent was one number. The medication was another. Lucia's school supplies, the field trip permission slip that had come home last Tuesday that cost $15 she had not budgeted for, the shoes that were already getting tight, all of it was arithmetic. Delia was very good at arithmetic. She had to be. There was no one else doing the math. Lucia's father had left when the child was 2. He had not left with any drama or cruelty. He had simply left the way water leaves a container when the container is tipped too far, gradually and then all at once, and then he was just not there anymore. Delia had not had the time or the luxury to be as devastated as she might otherwise have been, because Lucia still needed feeding at 6 in the morning regardless of anything her mother was feeling, and the rent was still due on the 1st. And so Delia had done the thing she always did with things that couldn't be changed. She had put it behind her. She had gotten up. She had kept moving. She lived in a 2-room apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked about 60% of the time, and the other 40%, she carried her groceries up the stairs and didn't complain about it to anyone. The apartment was clean. This she managed fiercely, the way certain people manage the one thing they can control when everything else feels precarious. The dishes were always done. Lucia's drawings were pinned in a deliberate row above the small desk in the corner. There was a plant on the windowsill that Delia watered every Tuesday and Friday, without fail, not because she particularly loved plants, but because it was something alive that depended on her, and she had made a promise to it, and she intended to keep it. She kept her promises. This was not a small thing about her. This was, in fact, the central thing about her, though very few people in her life had taken the time to notice it. At the Whitmore Complex cafeteria, Delia worked the serving line beside three other women, Portia, Shauna, and a woman everyone called Big D, who was not big at all, but had been given the name by someone years ago as a joke that had outlasted whoever had made it. Portia and Shauna were friends in the specific, exclusive way that cafeteria workers sometimes become friends, bonded by proximity and shift schedules and the particular intimacy of spending 6 hours a day in a room that smells like industrial cleaning solution and reheated eggs. They were not unkind people in the full sense of the word. They were ordinary people who had found, in the mockery of Delia, a small and reliable source of entertainment. It had started, as these things often start, with something trivial. Delia had mispronounced a general term once, her accent softening certain consonants in a way that was barely noticeable and meant nothing, and Portia had caught it and laughed, and Shauna had laughed, and from that point forward there had been a nickname. The ambassador, delivered with an exaggerated bow whenever Delia entered the serving line, and then a whole architecture of small diminishments that had been built up over 4 years, one brick at a time, until the wall was quite high and quite solid, and everyone on their side of it had forgotten it was something they had built. They made comments about Delia's lunches, which she brought from home in a small container because buying cafeteria food took money she didn't have. They made comments about her shoes, which were always clean but worn at the heel. They made comments, when they thought she couldn't hear, about whether she understood things, whether she was following along, whether she had the capacity for more complex tasks. This last category of comment, delivered with a particular kind of benevolence that was somehow worse than the others, the charity of people who have decided they are looking after someone less capable than themselves. Delia heard all of it. She heard most of it. She processed it in the quiet and efficient way she processed most difficult things, the way you process a recurring cost you cannot avoid. You account for it, you accommodate it, you continue. She did not cry about it at work. She had cried about it once in the very beginning in the staff bathroom during a break, and she had decided that once was enough. She was not going to give them that. She was going to do her job well, go home to Lucia, and remember what her mother had told her when she was a girl in the apartment they had all shared, the 4 of them in 3 rooms, back when Delia was small enough to think her mother knew the answer to everything. Mija, her mother had said, in that specific voice she used for things she needed to make sure stayed, low and deliberate, the way you place something fragile on a shelf. The people who make you feel small are always smaller than they look. And the people who are watching, the ones who matter, they see everything. They always see everything. So you just keep being who you are. Delia had kept being who she was. For years in, it was still costing her something. But she kept doing it anyway. The day the stranger came in, Delia almost missed him entirely. It was a Tuesday in November. The cafeteria was at its mid-morning peak, the serving line backed up past the self-serve station. The noise of it, the trays, the voices, the industrial hum of the equipment, at that particular pitch that stops being background and starts being a physical thing you move through. Portia and Shauna were in their usual rhythm, working the line with the practiced efficiency of people who have done the same sequence of actions so many times their hands operate independently of their thoughts. Big D was on the steam table. Delia was at the end of the line, managing the bread and the beverages and the occasional question from people who wanted to know if there was a gluten-free option. There wasn't, or whether the soup had pork in it. Sometimes it did. She was refilling the coffee urn when she first saw him. He was at the far end of the cafeteria, near the section of tables that nobody ever chose willingly, the ones by the service entrance, where the ventilation made a sound like breathing and the floor occasionally felt slightly sticky regardless of how recently it had been cleaned. He had come in through the side door, not the main entrance, which was unusual. Most people came through the main entrance. The side door was technically for staff, though nobody enforced this with any consistency. He was an older man, 60, maybe 65. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a plain dark jacket that had seen considerable use, a collared shirt open at the neck. He was not, by any measure, a striking figure. He was the kind of man who moved through a room without triggering any of the social reflexes that power and status usually trigger. No straightening of postures, no unconscious making of space. He simply existed in the room the way furniture exists in a room, noticed and then immediately unnoticed. He was carrying a tray. This was notable because it was not mealtime. It was 9:15 in the morning, which fell between the breakfast service and the mid-morning coffee break. In that gap where the cafeteria was technically still serving, but technically also winding down, and the food available was whatever remained of the breakfast run. Some slightly dried-out egg scramble, the tail end of the oatmeal, a diminishing stack of whole wheat toast, and the coffee, which at this hour was either very fresh or deeply committed to mediocrity, depending on who had made it last. Nobody had gone to him. Portia and Shauna were in the back, doing the changeover from breakfast to the mid-morning setup, doing it loudly and with a particular conversational energy that meant Delia's name had probably come up at least once. Big D was on break. The supervising manager, a man named Hollins who wore short-sleeved dress shirts year-round and had the energy of someone who had once been told he was a natural leader and had never recovered from the compliment, was in his office with the door three-quarters shut, which meant he was on a personal call or asleep in his chair, both of which happened with approximately equal frequency. So there was nobody to help the man at the table by the service entrance, with his tray and his unremarkable jacket and his stillness. The kind of stillness that didn't draw attention to itself. The kind of stillness that, if you were paying attention to the wrong things, looked exactly like not matching. Delia was paying attention to the right things. She finished with the coffee urn. She picked up a small plate with 2 pieces of toast, left over from the breakfast line, destined for the discard bin in approximately 4 minutes, and she walked to the far end of the cafeteria. The man looked up when she arrived. He had the eyes of someone who had spent a long time watching things carefully. Not suspicious eyes, not unkind eyes. The eyes of a person who has learned, through some extended experience, to take the full measure of a situation before speaking. "The oatmeal's still good if you want some," Delia said. "I could bring you a bowl. And the coffee just ran fresh about 6 minutes ago, so it's actually decent right now." He looked at her for a moment. "That'll be fine," he said. His voice was quiet and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't seem like it had ever needed to raise itself to be heard. "You take anything in the coffee?" "Black." She nodded. She went back to the line, filled a bowl of oatmeal, poured a cup of coffee. Black, the new pot, not the one from the burner that had been sitting since 7, and brought them back on a tray with a small cup of sliced fruit that was left from the morning setup. She set it down in front of him without ceremony. "There's sugar if you want it," she said, and she pointed to the condiment station at the end of the room. "I'm fine," he said, and then, after a beat, "Thank you." The way he said it was not the way most people said thank you in a cafeteria setting, which was automatically and without particular meaning, the word functioning less as gratitude and more as a signal that the transaction was complete. He said it the way people say thank you when they mean it and are not accustomed to having to say it because they are not accustomed to needing things from people they cannot otherwise offer something in return to. Delia noticed this. She didn't say anything about it. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, and she went back to the line. Behind the partition that separated the serving area from the main kitchen pass-through, Portia and Shauna were doing the changeover. Delia could hear them before she reached the partition. She could always hear them, in the same way you can always hear a radio that isn't quite turned down enough. She went all the way over there to serve him. Portia's voice. "She's not his personal waitress. He's probably one of the maintenance contractors." Shauna came in the wrong door, a sound that was close to a laugh. "She's always doing that, making herself into everybody's helper." Portia's emphasis on the last word in a tone that transformed it into something small and slightly embarrassing, like she's auditioning for something. She did not cry about it at work. She had cried about it once in the very beginning in the staff bathroom during a break, and she had decided that once was enough. She was not going to give them that. She was going to do her job well, go home to Lucia, and remember what her mother had told her when she was a girl in the apartment they had all shared, the 4 of them in 3 rooms, back when Delia was small enough to think her mother knew the answer to everything. Mija, her mother had said, in that specific voice she used for things she needed to make sure stayed, low and deliberate, the way you place something fragile on a shelf. The people who make you feel small are always smaller than they look. And the people who are watching, the ones who matter, they see everything. They always see everything. So you just keep being who you are. Delia had kept being who she was. For years it was still costing her something. But she kept doing it anyway. The day the stranger came in, Delia almost missed him entirely. It was a Tuesday in November. The cafeteria was at its mid-morning peak, the serving line backed up past the self-serve station. The noise of it, the trays, the voices, the industrial hum of the equipment, at that particular pitch that stops being background and starts being a physical thing you move through. Portia and Shauna were in their usual rhythm, working the line with the practiced efficiency of people who have done the same sequence of actions so many times their hands operate independently of their thoughts. Big D was on the steam table. Delia was at the end of the line, managing the bread and the beverages and the occasional question from people who wanted to know if there was a gluten-free option. There wasn't, or whether the soup had pork in it. Sometimes it did. She was refilling the coffee urn when she first saw him. He was at the far end of the cafeteria, near the section of tables that nobody ever chose willingly. The ones by the service entrance, where the ventilation made a sound like breathing and the floor occasionally felt slightly sticky regardless of how recently it had been cleaned. He had come in through the side door, not the main entrance, which was unusual. Most people came through the main entrance. The side door was technically for staff, though nobody enforced this with any consistency. He was an older man, 60, maybe 65. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a plain dark jacket that had seen considerable use, a collared shirt open at the neck. He was not, by any measure, a striking figure. He was the kind of man who moved through a room without triggering any of the social reflexes that power and status usually trigger. No straightening of postures, no unconscious making of space. He simply existed in the room the way furniture exists in a room, noticed and then immediately unnoticed. He was carrying a tray. This was notable because it was not mealtime. It was 9:15 in the morning, which fell between the breakfast service and the mid-morning coffee break. In that gap where the cafeteria was technically still serving, but technically also winding down, and the food available was whatever remained of the breakfast run. Some slightly dried-out egg scramble, the tail end of the oatmeal, a diminishing stack of whole wheat toast, and the coffee, which at this hour was either very fresh or deeply committed to mediocrity, depending on who had made it last. Nobody had gone to him. Portia and Shauna were in the back, doing the changeover from breakfast to the mid-morning setup, doing it loudly and with the particular conversational energy that meant Delia's name had probably come up at least once. Big D was on break. The supervising manager, a man named Hollins who wore short-sleeved dress shirts year-round and had the energy of someone who had once been told he was a natural leader and had never recovered from the compliment, was in his office with the door three-quarters shut, which meant he was on a personal call or asleep in his chair, both of which happened with approximately equal frequency. So there was nobody to help the man at the table by the service entrance, with his tray and his unremarkable jacket and his stillness. The kind of stillness that didn't draw attention to itself. The kind of stillness that, if you were paying attention to the wrong things, looked exactly like not matching. Delia was paying attention to the right things. She finished with the coffee urn. She picked up a small plate with 2 pieces of toast, left over from the breakfast line, destined for the discard bin in approximately 4 minutes, and she walked to the far end of the cafeteria. The man looked up when she arrived. He had the eyes of someone who had spent a long time watching things carefully. Not suspicious eyes, not unkind eyes. The eyes of a person who has learned, through some extended experience, to take the full measure of a situation before speaking. "The oatmeal's still good if you want some," Delia said. "I could bring you a bowl. And the coffee just ran fresh about 6 minutes ago, so it's actually decent right now." He looked at her for a moment. "That'll be fine," he said. His voice was quiet and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't seem like it had ever needed to raise itself to be heard. "You take anything in a coffee?" "Black." She nodded. She went back to the line, filled a bowl of oatmeal, poured a cup of coffee. Black, the new pot, not the one from the burner that had been sitting since 7, and brought them back on a tray with a small cup of sliced fruit that was left from the morning setup. She set it down in front of him without ceremony. "There's sugar if you want it," she said, and she pointed to the condiment station at the end of the room. "I'm fine," he said. And then, after a beat, "Thank you." The way he said it was not the way most people said thank you in a cafeteria setting, which was automatically and without particular meaning, the word functioning less as gratitude and more as a signal that the transaction was complete. He said it the way people say thank you when they mean it and are not accustomed to having to say it because they are not accustomed to needing things from people they cannot otherwise offer something in return to. Delia noticed this. She didn't say anything about it. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, and she went back to the line. Behind the partition that separated the serving area from the main kitchen pass-through, Portia and Shauna were doing the changeover. Delia could hear them before she reached the partition. She could always hear them, in the same way you can always hear a radio that isn't quite turned down enough. She went all the way over there to serve him. Portia's voice. "She's not his personal waitress. He's probably one of the maintenance contractors." Shauna came in the wrong door, a sound that was close to a laugh. "She's always doing that, making herself into everybody's helper." Portia's emphasis on the last word in a tone that transformed it into something small and slightly embarrassing, like she's auditioning for something. He picked up the small cup of sliced fruit. He ate it slowly. He thought about what his inspection was going to find and what he was going to do with what he found. He was still thinking about it when the woman came back at the end of the coffee service to collect his tray. He hadn't finished the coffee. She reached for the cup, and he said, "It's all right. I'll bring it up when I'm done." She paused. "Take your time," she said, and she left the tray where it was. He watched her walk back to the line. He set the coffee down on the table. He took out a small notebook from the inside pocket of his jacket, the kind of notebook that didn't look like much, that cost very little, that had lived in the inside pocket of a series of similar jackets for 38 years, and he wrote 2 words in it, in a shorthand he had used since before Delia Santos was born. Then he closed the notebook. He finished the coffee. He picked up the tray and carried it to the drop-off point and set it down and walked back out through the side door. Nobody noticed him leave. Nobody, that is, except Delia, who was at the beverage station and happened to look up at the right moment. She saw the tray already at the drop-off point, already set down neatly by the man himself. She saw the side door, still moving on its hinge. She noted this the way she noted most things about her days, quietly, specifically, without making too much of it. He had cleaned up after himself. He had said thank you and meant it and hadn't waited for someone to collect after him. She had been working in this cafeteria for 4 years. She could count on one hand the number of people who had done both of those things. She went back to the serving line. There was an hour left in the mid-morning service. The ventilation was making its breathing sound. Portia was telling Shauna something that made Shauna laugh, and neither of them looked at Delia, which was either cruelty or indifference, and had at some point ceased to matter which. Delia refilled the fruit station. She straightened the bread display. She thought about what she was making for Lucia's dinner and whether there was enough in the freezer or whether she needed to stop at the corner store on the way home, which would mean adjusting the budget, which was always adjustable because it had to be. She did not think about the old man with the quiet eyes and the notebook in his jacket pocket. She did not think about the way he had said thank you. She thought about Lucia. She thought about the rabbit veterinarian her daughter intended to become. She thought about the $15 for the field trip that she still needed to find somewhere. The ventilation made it sound. The cafeteria hummed and moved around her. She kept working. In the inside pocket of a jacket that cost $48, in a parking structure 3 levels below the building, a general sat in an unremarkable car and read 2 words he had written in a notebook. He was already thinking about what came next. He came back on Thursday. Same jacket, same side door, same tray, same table at the far end by the service entrance, same black coffee, same quiet eyes that took the full measure of a room without announcing that they were doing so. He arrived at 9:20, which placed him again in that gap between the breakfast wind down and the mid-morning proper, when the cafeteria was thinning out and the serving line had the slightly exhausted quality of a performance still running after most of the audience had gone home. Delia saw him when she came out of the back with a fresh tray of sliced fruit. She recognized him immediately, not because he was memorable in any conventional sense, but because she had a particular memory for the things that diverged from the expected. He had cleaned up after himself on Tuesday. He had said thank you and meant it. These two facts had lodged somewhere and stayed. She set the fruit tray down. She checked the coffee. The new pot had just run from minutes ago, still good. She filled a cup. She brought it to him before he had made his way to the serving station. He looked up. Black, she said, and she set it down. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. Something quieter than surprise. The expression of a person whose hypothesis has just been confirmed. Thank you, he said. The eggs are still decent if you want them. And there's oatmeal again. Oatmeal's fine. She brought it. She brought the small cup of fruit again because there was extra and it was going to be composted at 10 o'clock regardless. She set everything down without ceremony and went back to the line. Behind the partition, Portia had seen. Delia could tell by the quality of the silence when she came back through. That particular compressed silence of people who are loading something up to say, "Your boyfriend's back," Portia said, not looking at her. The word boyfriend delivered in a tone that made it mean something closer to project, something closer to delusion. Shauna made a sound of agreement that didn't require words. Delia did not respond. She went to the back and checked the oatmeal supply and came out again and worked the line. At 10 o'clock, she composted the remaining fruit. At 10:15, she wiped down the serving counter and prepared it for the mid-morning changeover. She did not look at the man's table while she did this. But she was aware, in the peripheral and practiced way of someone who has spent years managing a room, that he was still there, that he was eating slowly, that his eyes, when they moved across the cafeteria, moved with a quality of attention that was different from the attention of people who were simply waiting for time to pass. She had seen that quality of attention before, though she couldn't immediately place where. She thought about it during the changeover, and she thought about it on her break, sitting in the small staff lounge with a cup of coffee and the container of rice and beans she had brought from home. And then she placed it. Her daughter Lucia looked at things that way. When she was studying something she cared about, a beetle she had found on the windowsill, a diagram of the human heart in her science reader, the particular way light moved through a glass of water, Lucia went still in exactly that way. Eyes that were not just looking but reading. Eyes that were collecting and filing and drawing conclusions. Delia thought it was interesting that the only other person she had seen look at things that way was a 7-year-old who wanted to be a rabbit veterinarian. She ate her rice and beans. She went back to the line. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and on the third Tuesday, a Wednesday. By the fourth week, Delia had established a small, wordless routine with him. Coffee when he arrived. Whatever was freshest from the line, brought to him without his having to queue. The small cup of fruit when there was extra. A brief exchange, 2 or 3 sentences, never more, about what was available and whether it was decent. He always said thank you. He always meant it. He always cleaned up after himself. She did not know his name. She did not ask. In 4 years of working the Whitmore cafeteria, she had learned the names of perhaps 12 people out of the several hundred she served regularly. And those 12 were people who had introduced themselves or wore name tags that were legible at serving line distance. The man in the ordinary jacket didn't either. He was simply the man who came through the side door and sat at the table by the service entrance and watched the room with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who was reading something the room didn't know it was saying. She did not know that during those same weeks, a series of other things were happening in other parts of the Whitmore complex that would eventually arrive with some force at the cafeteria serving line. She did not know that the Inspector General's preliminary findings, filed quietly, distributed to a limited list, written in the spare and precise language that General Robert Calloway had used to document institutional problems for 38 years, had identified 17 items requiring immediate attention across the complex. She did not know that 6 of those 17 items related to personnel management, and that 2 of those 6 were specifically about the civilian cafeteria, and that 1 of those 2 was about the culture of the serving staff, and that the general's notation on that particular item was brief and specific in the way that the most serious notations always are. She did not know any of this. She was thinking about Lucia's school shoes and whether they could last another month. What she knew was this. On a Wednesday morning in the 5th week, Manager Hollins came out of his office at 9:40 and stood at the end of the serving line and watched the mid-morning service with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not his usual expression, which ranged between slightly bored and slightly irritated, depending on who had most recently disappointed him. This expression was something closer to alert. The way a person looks when they have been told, in terms they found impossible to dismiss, that something in their department is being watched. He watched the line for 10 minutes. He went back into his office. He came back out. He watched for 5 more minutes. He looked at the table by the service entrance. The man with the ordinary jacket was there, as he had been every Tuesday and now also some Wednesdays, and something registered in Hollins's face. Not recognition. Something smaller than recognition. A flicker of awareness that he immediately suppressed, because suppressing awareness of things that made him uncomfortable was one of Hollins's foundational professional skills. He looked at Delia. He looked at Portia and Shauna. He went back into his office, and this time he stayed there. Nothing changed that day, but Delia noticed a flicker. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, quietly, specifically, without making too much of it. Something had shifted in the air of the place. She didn't know what. She filed it and continued. The moment that everything changed was not dramatic. Mama always warned me about that, about expecting the turning points of life to arrive with music and announcement. When most of them arrive, so quietly you almost miss them entirely. You don't hear the hinge turning. You only understand, later, that a door has opened. The moment was a Friday morning, the 6th week. Delia was on the line at 8:15. The breakfast service in full swing. The cafeteria louder than usual because a group of administrative staff had a 9 o'clock meeting and everyone was fueling up beforehand. The line moved quickly and Delia moved with it, efficient and steady, tray after tray, the same sequence of small decisions. Does this person need a spoon? Did that person ask for no butter? Is the scrambled egg station getting low? Yes, it is signal to the back, running in quiet parallel to the physical work. She was at the bread station when she heard it start. A man at the front of the line, mid-40s, civilian employee, the kind of person who moved through institutional spaces with the particular entitlement of someone who had been there long enough to stop noticing the people who served him, had made some kind of error with his tray. He'd overloaded it, probably, and something had slid, and now there was a minor mess at the station where Portia was working. The mess itself was not significant. What followed was, Portia, catching the moment wrong, said something sharp. Not at the man. Portia was not that foolish, but loudly enough and in a direction close enough to the general vicinity of Delia, who was 3 feet away at the bread station, that the intended target was clear to everyone within earshot. Something about some people not paying attention. Something about this wouldn't keep happening if certain people did their actual job. The words themselves were not the point. The tone was the point. The tone that said, there's a problem here, and I am indicating where the problem lives, and I am doing it in a room full of people. Several of the people in line looked at Delia. The man with the overloaded tray looked at Delia. Someone made a small sound that was either sympathy or its opposite. Delia said nothing. She kept her hands moving. She put bread on the bread station. She replaced the tongs. She did not flush, and she did not cry, and she did not look at Portia. She had learned to do this the way you learn anything that is practiced under pressure, imperfectly and painfully at first, and then, over time, with a steadiness that might look to people who hadn't watched the learning like it had always been there. But something was different this Friday. From the table at the far end of the cafeteria, the table by the service entrance that most people never chose, the man in the ordinary jacket had gone very still. He had been watching the line. He watched it every time he came. He watched the rhythm of it, the interactions, the small moments of friction and ease that revealed how a place actually worked below the level of what it was officially supposed to be doing. He had watched Delia work for 6 weeks with the patient, systematic attention he brought to anything that mattered. And now he was watching this. He watched Delia keep her hands moving. He watched her replace the tongs. He watched the man with the overloaded tray move on, already forgetting, the way people forget small cruelties that didn't happen to them. He watched Portia return to her station with the particular satisfaction of someone who has thrown something and seen it land. He watched Delia for another 60 seconds. She did not change. She was still steady, still precise, still giving the full quality of her attention to the tray in front of her, and a one after that, and a one after that. General Robert Calloway reached into the inside pocket of his $48 jacket. He took out the small notebook. He opened it to a fresh page. He wrote something. He closed the notebook. He put it back. Then he did something he had not done in 6 weeks of coming here. He picked up his tray and he walked to the serving line. Delia saw him coming. She recognized the jacket before she recognized the face, registered it at the edge of her vision, and then brought her attention around to it properly. He had never come to the line before. He had always sat and waited for her to bring things. She wasn't sure why the change registered as significant, but it did. He set his tray down at the bread station. He looked at her directly. "You're good at this," he said. It was not what she expected. She wasn't sure what she expected, but it wasn't that. "Sorry," she said. "Your work." He said it the same way. He said everything, quiet, unhurried, with the quality of someone who has considered the words before using them. "You're good at it. I've been watching for a while." Delia blinked. Behind her, she could feel the quality of attention from Portia's direction shifting. That particular alert stillness of someone who is tracking a conversation they weren't meant to overhear. "Thank you," Delia said carefully. "Can I get you something?" In a moment, he picked up a piece of bread, set on the tray, looked at her again. "How long have you been here?" "For years." "Do you like it?" The question was so direct and so genuinely curious that it took her a moment to process it. In 4 years, no one had asked her that. Not Hollins. Not the HR coordinator who processed her annual review. Not anyone. The question of whether Delia Santos liked her job had simply never been raised in an institutional context, because the institution's interest in her did not extend that far. "I like the work," she said, which was honest. She had learned to be specific about things like this, to separate the things she did from the circumstances in which she did it, because one was worth something and the other was survivable. "I'm good with people, and I don't mind the hours." He nodded as if she had confirmed something. "What's your name?" he asked. She told him. He repeated it back to her once, quietly, the way you repeat something you intend to remember. "Delia, and you," she said, because it seemed like the natural next thing to say, and because she was someone who paid attention to things in both directions. He looked at her for a moment. Not a pause of evasion. A pause of someone deciding something. "Calloway," he said. "Robert Calloway." He picked up his tray. He walked back to his table. Delia stood at the bread station for a half-second longer than necessary. Then she went back to work. Behind her, Portia was very quiet. The quality of the silence was different from the usual silence of indifference or contempt. It was the silence of someone who has noticed something they can't yet name and are trying to work out whether it should concern them. It should have, but they didn't know that yet. If this story has found its way to you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Mama Told Me. Your support is what keeps these stories alive, and more of them coming your way. That afternoon, Delia took the 2:14 bus home. She picked up Lucia from the neighbor's apartment. Lucia came out still talking about something that had happened at school involving a hamster and a misunderstanding, and Delia listened with her full attention the way she always did, because Lucia's stories were the best part of the day, and Delia had decided a long time ago that she was not going to be the kind of mother who only half listened. They ate dinner. Delia had found enough in the freezer after all. While Lucia did her reading assignment at the small desk under her row of drawings, Delia washed the dishes and thought about the man named Calloway who had come to the line for the first time in 6 weeks and asked her if she liked her job. She thought about the way he had said, "You're good at this," not as flattery, not as the kind of thing people say to service workers the way they say "have a nice day," automatically and without payload. He had said it the way you say something that is simply and exactly true and that you feel it matters to say out loud. She thought about his eyes and the notebook in his jacket pocket and the way he had repeated her name once, quietly, as if he was committing it to something. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands on the dish towel. She looked through the kitchen doorway at Lucia, bent over her reading with the focused intensity of a person who has somewhere to be. Delia had somewhere to be too. She always had. The difference was that she was beginning, for the first time in 4 years, to feel that somewhere might be more specific than she had allowed herself to think. She put the dish towel down. She went to the doorway. "Lucia," she said. Her daughter looked up. "How are the shoes holding up?" Lucia looked at her feet with the frank assessment of someone who had not yet learned to manage other people's worry. "The left one is a little tight," she said. "Okay," Delia said. She went back to the kitchen and she updated the arithmetic in her head, and she found a way to make it work. The way she always found a way to make it work, because making it work was not a skill Delia Santos had been given. It was a skill she had built deliberately and without recognition, the way she had built everything in her life that was worth having. In a building 3 miles away, in an office that smelled of institutional coffee and dry air, a general was writing his formal report. He wrote for 2 hours without stopping. The language was precise and spare, as it always was, because he had learned long ago that precision was a form of respect for the subject, for the reader, for the truth that both of them deserved to receive undiluted. On the 3rd page, in a section titled Personnel, Commendations and Concerns, he wrote a single paragraph about a woman named Delia Santos, cafeteria worker, for years of service, serving line. The paragraph was 8 sentences long. It used words like consistent, principled, exceptional under pressure, and demonstrably underutilized. It was the kind of paragraph that moved things. He didn't know yet exactly what it was going to move. He had a sense, but the details would need to develop. What he knew, what he was certain of, with the certainty of someone who had spent 38 years learning to read the difference between a person performing virtue and a person who simply had it, was that whatever came next for Delia Santos should not look like what the last 4 years had looked like. He filed the report. He turned off his desk lamp. He drove home through the dark city with the particular quiet of a man who has set something in motion and is content to let it find its own pace. Outside Delia's building, the elevator was working tonight. She took Lucia up in it. In the apartment, she watered the plant on the windowsill. Tuesday was the regular day, but she had forgotten, and Friday was close enough. Lucia brushed her teeth without being asked, which was a small miracle, and went to bed and was asleep in approximately 4 minutes, in the sudden way of children who have used up every last unit of energy. Delia stood at the window for a while. The city was doing its nighttime things, the lights, the distant sound of it, the particular alive quality that cities have at 11 o'clock when the day workers are asleep and the night workers are awake and everyone else is somewhere in between. She thought about 4 years of keeping her head down and her hands moving. She thought about her mother's voice. The people who are watching, the ones who matter, they see everything. She turned off the light. She went to bed. She didn't know it yet. She couldn't have known it, but something had been written down about her that afternoon. Something that had her name on it, her real name, the full weight of what she was, and what she had kept being through 4 years of being told, in the various quiet ways institutions tell people things, that what she was not quite enough. The notebook had recorded her a long time ago. The report had made it formal. What came next was going to change more than her shoes. The letter arrived on a Monday. Not to Delia's apartment, to the cafeteria, specifically to the office of Manager Hollins, which was notable in itself because the cafeteria rarely received formal correspondence from anywhere above the level of the supply vendor, and when it did, the correspondence was usually about invoices. This was not about invoices. Hollins knew it wasn't about invoices the moment he saw the letterhead, the seal of the Inspector General's office, which he had not seen before and had not expected to see, and which produced in him, the moment it registered, a specific kind of stillness that was not composure. He read the letter once. He read it again. He set it down on his desk, and he looked at the far wall of his office for approximately 90 seconds, and then he picked it up and read it a 3rd time, as if the 3rd reading might change what the first 2 had established, which it did not. The letter informed him that as part of the Inspector General's ongoing review of the Whitmore complex, a mandatory all-staff meeting for the civilian cafeteria will be held the following Thursday at 9 o'clock in the complex's main conference room. Not the cafeteria's own small break room, but the main conference room on the 3rd floor. The one with the long table and the institutional flags in the corners and the projector screen that was usually only deployed for budget presentations and emergency briefings. The cafeteria would operate on reduced service during this time. Attendance was not optional. The meeting would be conducted by General Robert Calloway, Inspector General. Hollins stared at the letter for a long time. He had known, in a vague way, that mid-level managers know things they would prefer not to examine too closely, that the inspection was happening. He had known there was a general. He had not known, with any specificity, what the general had seen or what the general had concluded, because the preliminary report had not been distributed to his level and nobody had told him directly that this was a problem. Until now. The letter was telling him directly. It was doing so in the precise and bloodless language of formal institutional communication, which managed to be more frightening than any raised voice precisely because it was so calm. He called Portia and Shauna into his office one at a time and told them about the meeting. He did not tell them what was in the letter in any detail. He said it was a routine inspection review. He said everything was fine. He said this in the specific tone of a man who does not believe either of those things. He did not tell Delia. Delia found out the way she found out most things in that workplace. Not because anyone told her, but because she was paying attention. She saw Hollins go into his office with a piece of paper and come out without it. She saw Portia come out of the office looking like she had been told something unexpected. She noted the quality of the Tuesday shift, the unusual quietness of it, the way Portia and Shauna worked the line with a slightly diminished energy, as if some background confidence had been temporarily withdrawn. She noted the way Hollins came to the serving line twice that morning and stood watching it, not with his usual vague and slightly bored attention, but with the specific watchful quality of someone running calculations. She didn't ask. She kept working. She thought about it on the bus home, and she thought about it while she made dinner, and she thought about the man named Calloway who had looked at her and said, "You're good at this," and written something in a small notebook and filed something somewhere. And she thought about the quality of the air in the cafeteria this Tuesday compared to last Tuesday. And she filed all of it in the quiet, organized part of her mind that she kept for things she didn't yet have enough information to fully understand. On Wednesday, Big D stopped her in the break room during the 10 o'clock break. Big D was not often given to private conversations. She was a background presence in the cafeteria, the way certain necessary things are background presences, constant, reliable, and largely unremarked upon. She had been working the steam table at the Whitmore complex for 11 years, which was 7 years longer than anyone else currently on the serving staff, and she had the particular quality of someone who has watched a great many things come and go and has made a private decision to outlast all of them. She stood in the doorway of the break room, and she looked at Delia, and she said, low and quick, "You know there's a meeting Thursday." "I didn't," Delia said. Big D nodded. "All staff. Third floor conference room. 9 o'clock. General Calloway." Delia's hands went still on the coffee cup she was holding. "The man who comes in through the side door," Big D said. "The one you bring oatmeal to." A pause. Her expression was not unkind. It was something more complicated than that. The expression of someone who has watched a long story and is in the last chapters and is finally able to say out loud what she has been watching. "Honey, that man is not a maintenance contractor." Delia set the coffee cup down on the table. "No," she said. "I didn't think he was." Big D looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, with the economy of a woman who has never wasted a single word in 11 years, and she went back to the steam table. Delia sat in the break room for the remaining 4 minutes of her break. She drank the coffee without tasting it. She thought about 6 weeks of oatmeal and black coffee and a notebook in a jacket pocket and a man who said thank you and meant it every single time. She thought about her mother's voice. The people who are watching, the ones who matter, they see everything. She went back to the line. She worked the rest of the Wednesday shift with the same steadiness she always brought to it. She thought about Thursday, and she thought about what it might mean, and she made herself stop thinking about what it might mean because she had learned a long time ago that hoping for specific things was a way of setting yourself up to measure the gap between what you hoped and what arrived, and the gap was almost always larger than you could afford. She would find out on Thursday. She would be who she was on Thursday. That was all she could control, and it was enough. It had always been enough. Thursday morning was cold and clear. The kind of November morning that doesn't commit to anything but cold. No wind, no drama, just the specific brightness of winter light that makes everything look like it has been recently cleaned. Delia arrived at 5:30 as usual. She worked the early breakfast setup as usual. At 8:45, she took off her apron, washed her hands, straightened her name tag, and walked to the elevator with Big D. Portia and Shauna were already in the elevator. Nobody spoke on the way up. The elevator had a small mirror on the back panel, and Delia caught, in it, the reflection of Portia's face, the expression of someone who has spent the past 48 hours reviewing their own behavior, in the way that people only review their behavior when they suspect it is about to be reviewed by someone else. The third-floor conference room was larger than Delia had ever been inside. The long table had been cleared of its usual meeting materials and set up in a different configuration. Chairs along both sides, facing a presentation screen at the front. The institutional flags were in their corners. The projector was running, though it was showing only the seal of the Inspector General's office, dark blue on white, steady and unelaborated. There were other staff from the complex already seated, people Delia recognized by face but not by name, administrative workers, a few people from facilities, the security desk supervisor. She took a seat near the middle of the table. Big D sat beside her. Portia and Shauna sat further down. Hollins came in last, slightly too quickly, and took a seat at the far end. The door opened. General Robert Calloway walked in, and Delia felt, in the room around her, the specific collective shift that power produces when it reveals itself after having been concealed. Not the shift of surprise exactly, but of reorientation, the involuntary adjustment of people who have been relating to a situation in one way and are now being shown that the situation was something else entirely. He was not in the jacket today. He was in full dress uniform. And the uniform did what uniforms of that kind do. It took the quiet, unremarkable man she had been serving oatmeal for 6 weeks, and it showed, without any drama or announcement, what that man actually was. The rank on his shoulder, the decorations on his chest, the particular, unhurried way he moved into the room, which she recognized immediately because it was the same way he moved through the cafeteria, certain, unpressed, carrying authority the way a river carries current, not in bursts, but as a constant underlying property of itself. He sat at the head of the table. He looked around the room. His eyes moved the way she had watched them move for 6 weeks, taking full measure, filing it away, drawing conclusions. He did not look at Delia yet. He opened a folder. He began to speak, and the room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the person speaking has not asked for silence, but has simply begun, and silence has followed, naturally, the way air fills a space. He spoke about the complex. He spoke about the inspection. He spoke about what a functioning institutional environment required from the people who worked within it. He used words like accountability and standard of conduct and the dignity owed to every person in this building regardless of their position. And this last phrase he said with a specific and particular weight that was not loud, but was, in the way of things said by a person who knows how to place weight, impossible to miss. He spoke for 10 minutes. Then he opened a second folder. "I want to address some specific findings," he said, beginning with commendations. Delia's hands were folded on the table. She was very still. In the course of this review, I observed a number of staff members performing their work with consistency, integrity, and, in some cases, under conditions that were not designed to make that easy. He looked at the paper in front of him. "I'll begin with the cafeteria staff." He looked up. He looked at Delia, not as an examination, not with the formality of a general addressing a subordinate, with the direct, quiet look of a person who is about to say something true about someone and wants them to know it is being said with full intention. "Delia Santos," he said. The room shifted. She felt it. She felt Portia's stillness across the table with a physical precision. 4 years of service on the serving line. Consistently reliable. Consistently professional. Consistently, he paused on the word, and the pause had weight, kind. In this institution, and in every institution I have reviewed in 38 years, I have found that kindness at the operational level, daily, unrewarded, made a genuine cost to the person who gives it, is rarer than any other quality and more consequential than most. He looked at the paper again. I observed Ms. Santos over a period of 6 weeks. I observed her work with excellence under pressure, serve with genuine attention to the people in front of her, and conduct herself with a quality of dignity that this institution has not sufficiently recognized or rewarded. He set the folder down. The room was absolutely quiet. I have recommended, in my formal report, that Ms. Santos be considered for the position of cafeteria operations supervisor, a role that currently does not exist in this department, and that I have also recommended be created because this department needs it, and because she's the right person for it. Delia felt the words arrive one at a time, each one taking a moment to settle. Supervisor. Recommended. Right person. She pressed her hands flat against the table. She did not cry. She had decided a long time ago about crying in front of colleagues, and she was not going to revise that decision now. But she felt something move through her that was not quite emotion and not quite relief and not quite anything she had a word for. Something more like a tide that had been going out for 4 years, suddenly and completely reversing. Across the table, Portia was not looking at her. Shauna was looking at the table. Hollins, at the far end, had the expression of a man who has understood, all at once and too late, the full dimensions of a mistake. The general moved on. He spoke about the facilities team. He spoke about the security desk. He spoke about several procedural changes that were being implemented immediately. He spoke, at the end, about the items of concern, his voice going quieter, not softer, and about the culture of certain departments, and about what he had observed regarding how certain members of the cafeteria staff treated their colleagues, and about the specific changes to personnel documentation and conduct review that would follow from those observations. He did not say any names in this section. He did not need to. When he finished, he closed the folder. He looked around the room once more. This building serves the public, he said. Everyone in it, from this table to the serving line, is part of that service. The standard of conduct I expect is the same at every level. Not because I'm asking for it, because it is owed. He stood. The meeting was over. People filed out slowly, the way people file out of rooms where something significant has happened, reluctant to break the particular quality of air that significance leaves behind. Delia stood. Big D put a hand briefly on her arm. One firm pressure, released, and then went ahead of her through the door. Delia was nearly out of the room when she heard her name. She turned. The general was still at the head of the table, gathering his folders, and he had not raised his voice, had simply said her name, as he had in the cafeteria, quietly and without performance. She went back to the table. He looked at her. He looked the way he always looked, direct, unhurried, reading something in her face that she wasn't sure she was putting there intentionally. I should have introduced myself earlier, he said. You introduced yourself when you were ready to, she said. Something moved in his expression. That same quality she had noticed the first time she brought him oatmeal. The expression of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. The position, he said. It'll come through HR. It'll take a few weeks to formalize. But it'll come through. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said, with a specificity that made clear he meant it. I wrote down what I observed. I observed you. He paused. The rest of it was already there. Delia stood at the long table in the conference room with the institutional flags in the corners and the projector seal still running on the screen, and she looked at the man who had come through the side door for 6 weeks with a $48 jacket and a notebook, and she thought about 4 years of arithmetic and worn heels and a plant on the windowsill she had promised to keep alive, and a daughter who wanted to be a rabbit veterinarian, and a mother's voice carrying across 30. Years to say the ones who matter see everything. And she said the only true thing left to say. My daughter is 7, she said. She's going to want to hear this story. The general smiled. It was not a small smile. It was the smile of a man who has been in a great many rooms and seen a great many things and has found, unexpectedly and specifically, something worth smiling about. Tell her, he said, that the work matters. Tell her it always matters, even when nobody appears to be watching. He picked up his folders. He walked out. Delia stood in the room alone for a moment longer. The projector seal ran quietly on the screen. The flags were still. Outside the window, the November light was doing what November light does. Low and specific, catching everything it touched at an angle that made the ordinary look just briefly like something it had always secretly been. She turned off the projector on her way out. The seal went dark. She took the elevator back down to the cafeteria. She put her apron back on. She went to the serving line. The mid-morning service still needed doing, and she was going to do it well, the way she had always done it, because that was who she was, not because anyone was watching, not because a report had been filed, not because anything had changed this morning in terms of what the work required. The work had always required this. She had always given it. She picked up the tongs. She refilled the bread station. She checked the coffee. It needed a fresh pot, so she made one. She noticed the napkin holder was almost empty, and she refilled it. Portia came onto the line 15 minutes later. She stood 2 stations down from Delia, and she worked the line, and she did not make any comments, and she did not use the nickname, and she did not look in Delia's direction with that particular sidelong look. She worked in a silence that was a different kind of silence from the ones that had come before it. Not the comfortable silence of someone who owns a room, but the careful silence of someone who has just understood the full dimensions of the room they were actually in. Delia did not say anything to her. She had decided, some years ago, that she was not the kind of woman who needed the last word. She needed the real thing, and she had gotten it, and that was sufficient. The position was formalized 5 weeks later. The title was Cafeteria Operations Supervisor. The salary increase was not enormous, but it was real. Real enough to cover the school shoes immediately, real enough to retire the arithmetic about the bus fare and the field trip money, real enough that Delia sat at her kitchen table on the evening the offer letter arrived and looked at the number and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in 4 years. Not relief. Something larger than relief. Something that had to do with the distance between the self she had maintained through 4 years of being told in various quiet ways that she was not quite enough, and the self that a man with a notebook had apparently been reading accurately and in full from a table at the far end of the cafeteria. She called her mother that night. Her mother was in the apartment that had once held 4 of them in 3 rooms. Now just her, smaller in the specific way of a place when the people who filled it have grown and gone. Delia told her. She told the whole story, the side door, the oatmeal, the notebook, the conference room, the smile. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was how her mother had always listened to the things that mattered. When Delia finished, there was a silence. Then her mother said, in that low and deliberate voice, "I told you." And Delia laughed. She laughed the way you laugh when something your mother told you 20 years ago turns out to have been exactly right, which is a specific and irreplaceable kind of laughter, equal parts joy and recognition, and the particular gratitude of a person who was raised well enough to know it. Lucia, at the kitchen table doing her reading assignment, looked up. "What?" she said. "Come here," Delia said. Lucia came. Delia sat her down and told her the story. Not the whole story, not every detail, but the shape of it, the essential truth of it. A man came through a side door. He watched how I worked. He saw who I was. And what I had been all along turned out to be enough. Lucia listened with the full, serious attention she brought to things she considered important, which was most things, which was one of Delia's favorite qualities about her. When Delia finished, Lucia thought about it for a moment. "Was it the oatmeal?" she said. "It wasn't the oatmeal," Delia said. "It was everything before the oatmeal." Lucia considered this with the gravity of a child who intends to be a veterinarian and therefore takes all evidence seriously. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said, and she went back to her reading. Delia looked at her daughter at the small desk under the row of drawings, bent over her assignment with that focused, unhurried quality that Delia had once associated with an old man at a table by a service entrance. She looked at the plant on the windowsill. She looked at the offer letter on the kitchen table. She thought about a woman who had cleaned up after herself and a man who had done the same. About the things that are noticed when we think they are not. About the long, quiet work of remaining yourself in a world that is consistently and creatively offering you reasons not to. She got up and watered the plant. Tuesday was the regular day, and it was Tuesday. Some things do not require a reason beyond the promise. General Robert Calloway retired the following spring. His retirement ceremony was held in a room that was not a cafeteria, attended by people whose names appear in the kinds of newspapers that report on that tier of human event. There were speeches and decorations, and a great deal of the formal regard that 38 years of exceptional service had produced. He gave a short speech at the end. He spoke about what he had learned from watching institutions, about the gap between what organizations said they valued and what they actually rewarded, and about the cost of that gap, paid quietly and without complaint by people at every level. He spoke about the specific quality he had spent his career looking for and most reliably found not at the top of hierarchies, but in the middle of them, in the people doing the daily work of keeping things running without recognition. He didn't mention a cafeteria. He didn't mention oatmeal. He didn't mention a woman in a gray uniform with a name tag and worn shoes. But in the inside pocket of the jacket he wore to the ceremony, not the $48 jacket, a different one, a better one, because the occasion called for it, was the small notebook. And on one of its early pages, in the shorthand he had used for 38 years, were two words he had written on a Tuesday morning 6 months earlier. The words were, "Watch her." He had, and it had been, as he had suspected from the first cup of black coffee brought to him before he had asked for it, entirely worth watching. Mama always said this, that the world has a way of seeing what it is supposed to see, that the cruelty of ordinary people relies on the assumption that ordinary people are the only ones watching, that kindness given in the dark, given when no one appears to be looking, given at genuine cost, given without the expectation of return, has a way of being witnessed by exactly the right eyes at exactly the right time. She said it was not a guarantee. She was honest about that. She said it was not a promise that goodness would always be rewarded in this life in any specific or timely way. She said the work of being who you are, of keeping your hands moving and your head up and your kindness intact, even when it costs you something, that work is worth doing whether or not the general is sitting at the table in the corner. But she also said this, they're sitting at the table in the corner more often than you think. The ones who matter are watching. They see the way your hands move. They see what you do when nobody appears to be looking. They write it down in notebooks that you will never read, and they carry it in pockets that you will never know about. And at some hour that you cannot predict, they say a name out loud in a room where the right people are listening. She said, keep being who you are. She was right. She was always right. I think, if you're honest with yourself, your mama was probably right about this too. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. Mama always said the people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, I think you'll find the other videos on your screen are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. There's always a story waiting at Mama Told Me.